We're live.
We're at the Senate Appropriations, Thursday, January 23rd. We're going to go into the budget adjustment. And we're going to have Department of Vermont Health Access talk us through their parts of the BAA. So you introduce yourselves and we'll go from there.
Good afternoon. I have to look at my time for that. Good morning. Good afternoon. I am Deshaun Rose, the Principal Department of Vermont Access.
And I am Stephanie Barrett, the Financial Director at VIVA.
And do you want us to introduce ourselves or do you know folks? We'll do that. We'll start with Pro Tem.
Sure, I'm Phil Baruth from Chittenden Central District. Apologizing in advance in 10 minutes. I have to go for about 20 minutes, but has nothing to do with your presentation.
Excuse me, I'm Pat Brennan. I represent the Grand Isle District.
Jenny Lyons, Chittenden Southeast.
Andrew Pertzik, I represent the Washington District. Perfect.
Hello. Rich Westman.
Lemoyne.
He knows that. We're on speed dial together.
Bob Norris, Franklin County, and the town of Alborg and Grand Isle County.
And Watson, Washington District.
All right. We'll let you present as you wish.
All right. I'll turn over to Stephanie.
So the committee has two documents from us, a narrative that I'll walk through, and then the ups and downs sheet if we have questions and want to get a little bit more granular on the BAA. So this is our mid-year adjustment. And just to give you a ground and Viva, we're 1.25 billion in total across our 4 appropriation lines, all sources of funds. And we'll take a few minutes on our admin budget, which, you know, makes the department run. And then we'll go into the program budget, which is all the grants that go out. We have a rather significant adjustment in our program budget that we'll go into a little bit. In the administration line of DIVA, with this, the adjustments that are included here, it's $175 million total across all the funding sources in our admin budget. There are adjustments in our staffing and contract lines and adjustments in our operating that are mostly related to ADS, almost entirely related to ADS. Some are very just technical cleanup adjustments, and some of them are, the ones I'll touch on are the ones that are something new. So in staffing, the new piece that's in here for the remainder of this year is an adjustment for some temps to help us clear the backlog. We have about 1,500 cases left of aged, blind, and disabled caseload that has not been fully redetermined yet. And we have a deadline at the end of December to have them fully redetermined. And these are the cases that are folks that are more complicated and more labor intensive to redetermine. They don't really impact our caseload numbers because the vast majority of them remain eligible for Medicaid. We just have to complete the redetermination without disrupting the regular redetermination flow. So that's the ask for the temps that are in our admin budget. Vermont Legal Aid is simply a move from one place in the budget to another. It's a net neutral move. And then we have a few adjustments to DIVA contracts. One is an amendment to our MMIS contract. One is a technical adjustment on funding sources to the way funding flows for a variety of contracts, but it's a net neutral, it nets to zero. And then we also have a new initiative, the beginning of this, which is technical assistance to our MMIS system for the Justice Reentry Initiative, which is a new initiative that we have authority for, that we got in the last, not this most recent amendment, but the previous amendment to the waiver, which is, in short, having people enrolled in Medicaid before they come out and are out of incarceration. But this is technical to our system, getting them ready for that. And then on the operating side, we have one large adjustment. It's negative $8 million on our federal funds. That's simply right-sizing the authority. It's a holdover from timing of where a one-time item got sort of built into the base on the federal side, even though the general fund is in a one-time position. And so we need to get that just removed because it just is a mistake in the level of spending authority on the federal funds. And then the other adjustments in our operating lines are related either to the contracts that we pay for but are managed by ADS, or the overhead charges from ADS essentially. And that's the remainder of the adjustments in our operating budget. And I'm gonna stop there to see if anyone on the committee has any questions on our operating budget adjustment. Yes.
So I think you mentioned the Agency of Digital Services contract.
So there are several contracts. There are IT development contracts with vendors. The Agency of Digital Services holds the contract and manages the contract, but we pay for the contract. So they invoice us and there's several contracts that are like that. The one that is an adjustment that's net neutral is a funding adjustment, moving federal funds up and interdepartmental funds down.
Is that the 8 million, or that's?
The 8 million is not really, it's not directly related to, that's a mistake in our budget that we're just correcting.
Okay.
That's just a pure technical correction. The one that is,
Was it a timing correct?
it is timing. The federal funds ended up getting added several years ago with one-time general fund, but the federal funds got added to the base.
Okay.
And the timing of when we draw those federal funds, we want to leave enough so that we match that timing, but we don't want it to be overinflated in our base of federal spending authority that we can't draw. That's not good practice either. So that's the $8 million piece. The next one down, which nets to zero, but is 447 up in the general fund, but 781 down in interdepartmental transfers. That's the one that's it's a funding redistribution because we're trying to maximize those federal dollars. The way we're putting it into our advanced planning document is separately from things that have a different match rate. And then the ones that are, say, SLA, those are the ADS overhead charges, essentially. And then the last piece in here, I forgot to touch on that, is we do have to go for a procurement in a few years for our pharmacy benefit management system. And so you do see an amount of money in here for technical assistance to start that process of the procurement for a new PBM. So that's a process that's starting up now. We won't use all of this money in this fiscal year. You won't see this again in our budget. We'll come back in a few weeks, but it does give us the ability to start that process and have the project management assistance and business analyst assistance to start to scope out that procurement that we have to go through the process of over the next few years.
Will it be a new PBM?
So this is a very early stage of the procurement process. We have to actually develop the RFP
Okay,
and everything that's involved in that. So
we don't know.
we don't know. We have to get to that point.
The 2 million, 200,000 general fund for $2 million, and that's all IT in preparation for.
It's all in. It's meant to give us the capacity to have the technical assistance to get through the development of the RFP, the process of scoping out the technical pieces that are needed. That's the reason it's in right now, because we have to start that process now.
Got it.
So if everyone is okay on the administration budget, we can move to the program budget. And so DIVA's program budget, with this budget adjustment, ends up being just a little bit over $1 billion, $1.07 billion. It's across 3 appropriation lines in the budget, 307, 309, 310. When you're looking at your budget document, the reason it's split into 3 appropriations is because of the nature of the things that are being paid for. So the vast majority of it is global commitment under the waiver, but there are other programs that are either investments under the waiver that are in our state only, that are state only funded with general fund dollars. And then we have in our last appropriation, things that are not part of the waiver, like our dish payments are not in the waiver, and our CHIP program is actually seamlessly.
What is the dish?
It's a disproportionate share payment. It's a payment that Medicaid can make, drawing federal share to pay for hospitals for, on a distribution basis, for the care that they give to low-income folks. So we can have more of a discussion on how that's distributed. It's been a pretty flat amount and a pretty steady distribution formula across the state hospitals for several years. It has, the limit of it has come down. It was scheduled to come down and it has come down, but we had brought our dish payment down several years ago.
It's been there a long time.
Yep. And then the other thing that's in our non-waiver is our CHIP program, which is our children's health insurance program, which is seamlessly integrated, between Dr. Dinosaur Medicaid and Dr. Dinosaur CHIP coverage of kids. Senator Lyons.
So I'm asking a question that probably I should ask in my own committee, but the concerns that we currently have regarding commercial insurers and their solvency, and now you're looking at what's needed for expenditures, and how much do you take into consideration any effect or relationship with the private insurers?
So this is the Medicaid program mid-year, and we pay on the rates and the structure of the program that we have. And the discussion of how Medicaid is one of the 3 main payers between commercial and Medicare and Medicaid is a bigger discussion, I think, but this reflects only what our current status of operation is for the caseload that we cover that are eligible under Medicaid, and the structure of rates and payments that cover all the programs that we pay for.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Senator Watson.
Thank you. These questions are coming out of a place of ignorance, so I just want to admit that like up front. But for something like the global commitment, I hear that because this is a part of the budget adjustments. I guess if you could speak to like what would happen if we hadn't had these, the surplus to go pay for this, like what would it have looked like if we didn't have money to do this? Does that make sense?
I think that's a bigger question than just for me, because for the whole budget.
Yes,
but
this is accurate.
But Medicaid is an entitlement, and the reason. So I'm just going to take your question and step right into number 1 here for a moment. Is that okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So the first adjustment in our program budget is the caseload and utilization adjustment. It hits all 3 lines of our budget, all 3 program lines of our budget. That process of how we estimate caseload and utilization is a consensus process. It results in every January an adoption by the emergency board. The chair probably had to vote on yesterday of the caseload and of the projected Medicaid expenditure, of which about DIVA is half of. And that forecast, the consensus nature of that forecast means that we always are, coming to agreement in the early fall, revisiting and coming to agreement in the late fall again to set what we're going to ask for what we're seeing based on the most current information in the program. And so I can't answer what it would mean if you didn't have the general fund of roughly $35 million here to cover a cost that we saw coming at us, that would be very similar to any conversation that you folks would have in any sort of deficit type of situation that that's, you would have to be solving probably that across all sorts of areas, of which we would be one, and I can't tell you what any of the options would be unless we were facing it.
Because the costs aren't going away.
Yeah.
It would just
Yeah.
stay on the books as a
Yeah.
deficit.
Yeah, well, we would
So
still
come up
be
with-
paying providers if we had to, if we were not appropriated funding, we can't spend money that we don't have appropriated. So, this is a hypothetical example, but if we did not have the appropriation and we got to, say, May and didn't have spending authority, we would stop paying providers and you would hear from them.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
That's, we don't, that's a possibility. I don't think it's a realistic possibility, but it's a, hypothetical.
Thank you. That was helpful.
And so number one, this is our significant budget adjustment from that consensus process. When I was in a year ago, when we were presenting our ask for the 25 budget, I said, we, as a consensus group, we think it's okay to take $50 million out of our budget. We were doing that on information that didn't have the full impact of the redetermination in it yet. And so we missed the mark on that, really. And so that's what you're seeing here after 2 more quarters well, actually 4 more quarters of experience, but the last 2 being very indicative because they're fully redetermined in that quarter of information. And so that's what's driving this ask, is what we were seeing after, particularly the quarter that ended in September and the quarter that ended in June, where our actual cost per case was headed in that consensus process. Our caseload itself, we do a very good job of projecting. We came in very close in 24. We monitor it month to month. We don't see anything that's diverging. If we started to see that, that might be an indication of something else, but we don't see that. We look at caseload by what we call Medicaid eligibility groups. So general kids, general adults, new adults, age of blind and disabled population.
Number of people per those groups.
Yeah, there's how many people are in each group and where do we think that's gonna go over we're usually looking at a 2-year time span.
Caseload is, and I assume that's easier to project than utilization.
It is, because it's a pretty steady utilization, particularly, and I had a caveat in the presentation I gave last year, because we were coming out of that redetermination year. That meant that a lot of the public health emergency meant people couldn't come off Medicaid, so the count of caseload stayed high. And what we got was the mix of the impact of after people remained on, what their cost would be versus the lower cost per member per month when it was a mixed group, essentially. Although there are things that do have pressure in our budget in terms of like pharmacy costs and rebates coming in a bit lower. That type of thing is also incorporated into our consensus process, along with the experience of what our actual payouts on behalf of eligible folks have been.
And historically, that 78 million increase in utilization, is that, how abnormal is that?
That's a big budget adjustment. There's no way to say it.
Well, I didn't know if that was like normal, if it was like what kind of millions of dollars would be in a regular adjustment, or sometimes you don't have any for utilization.
Yeah, so this is a mid-year correction of, it was when we said last year, we think we can come down 50 million, that was a substantial adjustment. It was just in the opposite direction. But, on $1 billion+ budget, it's still a substantial swing.
And hopefully not a continuing trend.
Well, that's the one on the work that we've done and looking at, our caseload by who was on, both by, kids versus adults, but who was on and who came off, and the larger cost categories. We're hopeful that trend is flattening out, that we're not, we could see the trend upward in 22 and 23, but we're hopeful that the trend looks right now that it's flattening. And I've heard that from some other entities in terms of utilization at some hospitals, but not all. But at the same time, you've heard different, that the trend is completely continuing to increase on the commercial side. So
We've heard that, commercial keeps going up.
yeah. but not for all
Yeah.
carriers.
Yeah,
So it's a
interesting.
mixed signals, to say the least.
I know.
So that is our caseload and utilization ask. The vast majority of it is in our global commitment, which is where our biggest caseload is. We do have some up in our immigrant health insurance program. That's our state only, and our B-Farm program is up a little bit. And then we have it up in our CHIP program, which are it's basically kids. It's the same coverage that essentially, it's just these are slightly higher cohort income-wise of kids in the CHIP program. Just letting you process the caseload and utilization. We ready to move on from that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have two adjustments to rates midstream. One is the indexing on the payments that we make to the federally qualified health centers and rural health centers. There is a Medicare Economic Index, which is an inflationary index that under our construct we apply every year. So it's getting applied in February. It comes out in January. We apply in February. The majority of this $816,000 is that adjustment to the FQHC and rural health center rates. And then you'll see that again when you have our big bill, our FY26 ask, but it'll be annualized. And then we also have to maintain a minimum rate for our hospice services. And that's a very modest adjustment, but that happens with the calendar year, and so it happens halfway through our fiscal year. And then we do have one substantial offset to our budget adjustment that brings the total cost down. Last February, we had the Change Healthcare cyber attack that wreaked a bit of havoc in the system, particularly for our Medicaid pharmacy providers, but also other providers that use Change Healthcare as the clearinghouse to get their claims to us. But that one of the big impacts of that event was Change Healthcare, which is our PBM, processes, along with our pharmacy benefit, it processes our rebates under the Medicaid program. We have rebates that are mandated under Medicaid, and we have supplemental rebates, and our PBM processes those. They do the processing of invoices to the manufacturers so that the manufacturers can remit the rebates based on the actual pharmacy, various, drugs that have been prescribed and filled through the Medicaid program. And the outage delayed the invoices that should have gone out in February, which would have driven receipts to us in late April, May, and June. So we knew we were going to have a gap when we closed the fiscal year because of that. We weren't quite sure how much. We were making estimates of what that could be, and we did. We had a deficit partially due to these rebates not coming in time, but they did come in when the invoicing returned. They did start to come in July and August and into September. And so that's what you're seeing here is our best estimate of the rebates that came in the first 3 months of the year that they came in higher than they would have because they should have come in back 3-4 months ago. And so that's available for us to offset our budget adjustment ask. But it's one time in nature. It's just that we had to pay for it in June through another way, and now we're collecting it and helping us reduce this ask. Item 4 on our list, this is usually it has been in for the most part, for several years because of the ACO model that we have is a reconciled model. And so this is the reconciliation for the calendar year 23, plan year under the ACO. And so we're, a good more than a year out from the close of calendar year 23. It takes that long to do the reconciliation. Under that model, we reconcile to a total cost of care, which is actually the component of that that's embedded in this ask. It has been the closest it's ever been. Well under, like over 99% close on that, which is good news. But at the same time, we have an overhang from our redetermination issue where the attributed lives, we saw this, if you remember, we saw this last year as well, because people didn't get redetermined for 3 years, particularly children that aged from being a child to an adult. That meant that we were paying the ACO on a rate that was a child rate for somebody that changed to being an adult for a period, in this case, it could be the whole year because of when their redetermination happened, and so that's what the majority of this payout is, the reconciliation of that dynamic.
So is this unusually high?
It's fairly similar to what was last year in terms for that piece. It's half of what the total was. Last year we had also an equal amount. We had almost a $12 million adjustment, a reconciliation, because the cost of care came in very different. But we had a very similar, it might have been closer to $6 million for the attributed lives reconciliation.
Okay.
We have a few other net neutral moves in our program budget. One we've already talked about, legal aid, which is just moving out of program and up into admin. And then we have 2 programs, our Blueprint Spoke program and our Pregnancy and Pension Initiative, which used to be called the Women's Health Service Initiative. Both of those, there's no change to the cost of those programmatic pieces. They were just in our, they were embedded either in our global commitment baseline or our non-waiver, but they need to be accounted for as a global commitment investment, which means they just needed to be put from the lines that they're in into the right line for accounting purposes, for waiver accounting purposes as well. So those, there's no, we're just, in the case of the Blueprint Spoke and the Pregnancy and Pension, we're taking $4.6 million that was in this line and moving it down into another line. And you'll see that again when you see our 26 presentation. And then the last item in our program budget is another downward adjustment of $750,000 general fund for our Vermont cost sharing program. And this is related to the silver plan pricing, which is the pricing dynamic on the silver plans changed to maximize the tax credits on the exchange. This reflects the half-year value of the, what we just ended the open enrollment, and there are far fewer folks that would qualify for cost sharing because it's a better deal for them to buy a different metal than they have. And we've done mapping to gold, and so we don't need as much support from this line, which is a purely general fund funded line. The premium assistance is unchanged in this. Our cost of premium assistance is unchanged in this, but the cost sharing, which is a subset of premium assistance tied to the silver plans, is changing. And you'll see that rolled out and analyzed in our 26 budget as well. So that's the picture of everything that's on the ups and downs in a more summarized way for our budget adjustment. But then we have 2 one-time items included in the budget adjustment.
Go ahead. Okay.
So last year you appropriated money for what's called the Global Payment Program Pilot. And that is we had an option for hospitals to have the portion of the Medicaid payments that were reflective of that didn't go through the ACO because they weren't for attributed lives, to sort of mimic a global payment between the ACO payment for the covered services under the ACO for the attributed lives, to have that same global payment prospectively made for the unattributed lives. And so we had 5 hospitals opt in the summer. This amount of money is one time. It simply fills the fiscal gap when you do that, because you're making a prospective payment at the same time you have a run out of claims from, the past 8-12 weeks or so, for the most part. This amount of money increases that amount to allow other hospitals that would be interested in having that global payment to enter into the program, and also right sizes the tail, since we had the highest, it was UVM and Rutland and St. John Carey that came into the program, and we realized it's actually, we can track the claims and see what the actual tail is, and we were off by a little bit. So that's what this $4 million is allows more hospitals voluntarily to come in to have this pilot program for the, if this is effective in 25, sometime in the spring. And then the second one-time item that's on your list is a provider stabilization pot of money. I think you heard from Commissioner Gresham last Friday about this when he presented the overall picture of the budget adjustment, that this would lodge $10 million of general fund in DIVA to administer grants for stabilization for providers. And just to be very clear, it's a challenging thing to do, because it is a finite pot of money. And, we have a sense, Commissioner maybe wants to explain some of the types of providers we've heard from, but this is a recommendation from the administration that it be lodged in DIVA and administered from DIVA. And the central office has agreed to have they are seeking a technical assistance from an accounting firm so that we can properly vet the requests that come in. But, the timing and how these are administered are going to be, not that we're well aware of the need out there. It's just,
there's not another one of these, it's the same one. There's only one of these provider grant programs. There isn't 2 different ones for different types of providers. The one that Gresham spoke about is the only one that there.
So this is there is a process for nursing homes,
right,
and PNMIs that is existing statutory, that gets utilized, has been utilized a lot.
And then we have money in the VA for that.
And that would be in the Dale budget, that you'd see that. This is substance use providers.
QHCs, primary care practices, mental health providers, that
Potential home health providers.
Secretary Samuelson brought it up also.
So it's a new program,
It is a one-time
one-time
appropriation for a case-by-case
it's certainly
evaluation.
needed. Let's put it.
It's needed. It's
certainly needed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the question of
Yeah.
who comes, how much, how we,
Right.
that's the challenge in it. That,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First come, first serve,
We don't envision it like in the pandemic where you might have had a pot of money, you see how many people come and then you allocate a prorated amount. That's not a valuable approach to this.
No, because you'd have not enough money to do any good anywhere if you did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's I keep saying the word challenge just so people understand.
Got it.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of how many grants there would be? Is this like 3 grants or is it like 20 grants?
We have been approached by providers, and we know what they are, but we don't know the unknown.
There's just a couple. I mean, like, are we talking multi-million-dollar support or hundreds of thousands?
I think it's a range. I think it's both.
Okay, well, the Health and Welfare Committee, I'm sure will.
Oh,
give us
we'll
advice.
put all kinds of guidelines in place so well, but it will be useful.
That might.
it will be useful to hear about this at some point. Yeah, thank you.
It's certainly needed.
And that's the picture of Diva's
It's
budget
certainly
adjustment.
needed.
Okay,
We'll talk.
any questions for Eva, Commissioner for Stephanie? Any questions, anything else you want to tell us? I don't feel like we gave the Commissioner much opportunity to talk.
I have an expert here, so.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't have to
Okay.
He's not getting yelled at.
say.
Thank you for bringing her back.
Yeah. Always great to have her in the community. All right, well, thank you.
Sure, I mean,
We have any
you know
other
it's one of the bigger ones.
Yeah. Minute per dollar, you're very effective.
Yeah. That's a good calculation.
Tim, and as soon as they clear out, you can come make your way over there.
Probably.
I really don't.
They probably.
You have like a little
have
tablet,
six or
or
seven.
something I can write notes.
Yeah,
Nothing
there.
like that.
Oh, thank you.
I'll check it out. I just wanted to-
Yeah, I'm glad to know.
It's
Sheriff's
very
Station,
qualified
attorney's
help.
leadership in your other.
It's all the primary care
Plug in
doctors.
some okay.
Yes, absolutely.
I still have never forgotten.
And we can't make payroll. A week from
Yeah.
Friday, we can't make payroll.
What is this?
That's the gross, that's the general fund, and then you go to Medicaid match.
The Medicaid match is important, that's federal dollars, right?
Hello.
We have state dollars.
Yeah.
Generally,
this-
Medicaid is
I know, it's so
55
exciting.
back over
It's a
to
first
the
time.
state. So the that's the general.
No.
fund side, and that's the total amount of funds you make.
Yeah, Jim Climate, yeah, that was a good article.
So in other words, like on
Nice,
that
it's very
first
chill.
line with the temp backlog,
Which?
the temp
Oh,
backlog,
yes, okay. yeah.
Okay, so- we're putting in 165 and we're getting 3 times that amount from the federal government, just about.
And the last one's a gross represents.
Huh?
So that's.
You get a lot of hugs.
That's what the, well, oh no, gross is federal plus GI. Yeah, federal plus, so it's less, this is less of a match,
Oh
so
my
this is
God.
like
How's,
60-40 rather
how's
than.
221?
Right.
Oh, and
We get different matches.
But these
Yes,
one-time
oh,
arbitrations
yeah,
on the back,
right.
like 10,000.
We're gonna move on to the sheriff.
That one's different.
State's attorney. And you can,
Yeah.
So look at this one.
Actually, there's.
and we can have,
This is like 3 times, this is like 30-70 maybe.
yeah, those are the match. We can
Senator.
talk about it. Okay, so we are now moving from health to state's attorneys and sheriffs. So I will let the witnesses introduce themselves. Do you want us to introduce ourselves? Do you know everybody on the table?
I think we know everybody.
All right.
Tim Dumont, Executive Director at the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, and I started a couple weeks ago in the role, and Annie has kept me around since then. So Annie and I have, she's the one that yells at me occasionally, and she keeps me on track. Yeah, good to see everybody.
Annie Noonan, I'm a Director of Labor Relations and Operations for the Department of State's Attorneys, unofficially the Vice Principal who walks around with the rulers. Thank you for inviting us in, and I think we're gonna be relatively short today, if that maybe makes you happy, I think.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention, I gave you some data and information that you may find helpful contextually, but Annie's only gonna talk about 2 pages concerning DAA, but I gave you our caseloads and stuff like that, just so you have as a resource on the website.
That's the data review.
And I think most people know, but the Department of State's Attorneys, just as a very brief overview, is the administrative department for the 28 elected officials, 14 state's attorneys and 14 sheriffs. The state's attorneys and the sheriffs as elected officials, their salaries are set by statute. all of the other employees for our department. We have 2 bargaining units, one that is for the employees of the state's attorney's offices and the other for the state transport deputies. And those are the folks who go to the facilities and pick up people to get them to the court and back, or wherever the judges are sending people. So all in all, we have 175 employees. And none of our state's attorneys or sheriff's departments have any of their own budgets. If somebody said to me, what's the Franklin County budget? I'd have to say to you, they don't have a budget, and what they need, they come through the department and we pay all the bills out. It makes sense. We have sort of an unofficial budget that we work through. But primarily like many state agencies and departments, our main numbers in terms of our costs are personnel. And we have a very small operating budget. And that's why the reason I set that stage for you is because what you're going to see here right today really focuses on operating. So over the years, you know how this works. You know how the up and down numbers come. So we get sent a number from the administration, and we have to manage our budget to that bottom line number. And I used to always have to say to John Campbell when he would say to me, well, we need more money in this line. And I'd say, okay, John, I can put that in that line. But when I try to hit send, the program won't go through to finance and management. We have to, if they, just make this up. If the bottom line is $1 million and I try to write it for $1.2 million, it's not going to let me send it. It's a set program. So I used to say that to John. John, that's not how this works. What happens is we do the $1 million, then we go and tell the legislature where we're $200,000 short. So sort of, that's how that all goes. But here, what we've done over the years is when we've had those tough choices to make with internal service fees have gone up, whether it's ADS or workers' comp, any of those things. What we have prioritized over the years is people over other lines in our budget, over operating. We have done everything we can to make sure we've never been in a situation where we had to lay people off. There have been years where Barbara Bernardini and I sat and looked at the budget and thought, oh God, are we going to get into June? How are we rolling into June? So this year, we've had some unexpected hits to the budget that we more or less did not anticipate. And I'm going to walk you through this memo just briefly to tell you a little bit about that. So one of them is SharePoint. It's a system that the state sets up that basically people put data into. And we are about 2% of the state workforce, and we are using, by last account, we were using about 65% of SharePoint. And ADS has been very good to us. They've been working with us to try to figure out a relief to that. And you say, well, why are you using so much? And it has everything to do with the media, the body cams, the cams on the cruisers, anything like that is going in, and we have to keep it. Tim can talk a little bit about that, but I want to tell you that what we had was, initially, when we were looking at the bills that were coming across to us from ADS, we thought we were in a much deeper hole than we were. And I was able to work with Kate Slocum from ADS when she saw my first memo, and she said, I don't think that's quite right, Annie. I think actually it's not as bad as you think. But what we do need is about $168,000 to get us from today until July 1st. So we had a $42,000 bill, $42,500, that was unanticipated. And ADS is trying to find us a solution. There are other platforms out there that we might be able to get to, but they're testing some of them. And until they test them out, they don't want to move us off. Okay, just because some of that may be, we put all of our stuff in it, we can't retrieve it quick enough for a court hearing or an emergency hearing or something like that. So they want to make sure that if they're testing it, it will work for us. So we have to pay our fair share in terms of doing our business in state government, and we had a bill. It looks to us like when I talked to ADS that we will need $168,500 to get us from here to July 1 for this SharePoint.
So is that different than what was presented?
Yes, originally.
405.
So exactly. Do you have a corrected memo? I hope you do.
Yes.
Well, I'm looking
Yes.
at
We had
corrections.
seen that
Yes.
at first.
Yes. So what happened, Senator, was we received 2 bills, and one of them was for $255,000, and it appeared to us that was the SharePoint bill because we told we're going to get a bill, and that wasn't. It wasn't. It was a different bill. It was a standard user's bill, We attributed it to SharePoint. It was not SharePoint. So as I said, the good news is, Kate called me and said, I think, let's look at your bills and look at what you think you're paying. So when we did that, we were able to reduce that number back down to 168.5. So I thank
That's
you.
good.
Yep, good news. So that's what that's all about. The other thing is, for a number of years ago, the vendor that we had that handles our criminal case management it was JTI, Justware. That's what we're running today. They announced a number of years ago, we're no longer supporting your system. And it was not just us. There were many states attorneys, district attorneys around the country that use this program. It's criminal case management. And they just said, yeah, we're no longer supporting it. We're done. But for a couple of $1 million, you can go on our upgrade. And we had to explain to them, we don't get to just give you a couple of $1 million. There's a thing in state government called the RFP and bidding process, and we have to go through all of that. If you would like to become a bidder, we'll look at your new product, but we can't just give you like $3 or $4 million, whatever it was going to be. That was so we did all this stuff that we had to do, the RFP through BGS, the Attorney General's office, everybody who's involved in that. And we have selected matrix, and they are working, and they are very good. And thanks to this legislature, you got us $1.7 million in ARPA money at the time, because our ability to utilize a criminal case management system is all about clearing the backlog. And we were able to have a more efficient system, and it was going to integrate and talk to judiciary and state police. Wouldn't that be a major accomplishment if we could all chit-chat? So it was really going to be very helpful. So we don't need the money for Matrix, but what we do need is money to continue with our project manager. We're a department of 175 employees and 29 offices, and we have 2 IT people. That's it. So they're really stretched thin, and if anybody experienced the Microsoft 11 push through and your computer died last week, we had about 45 computers die last week. They're coming back online, but they died. So we have 2 IT people. So the project management people from Barry Dunn literally are helping the train stay on the tracks with this matrix system. And we don't have enough money to finish paying them. And so we've asked for, I believe, let me see, $60,000 in this budget year. And we will hopefully be able to move forward the next budget year to think of other ways to pay it, or we'll talk to you again next year. But I think we need about $60,000 to keep them on payroll. And they are probably the best vendor that state government has ever employed. And if you ever hear their name, Barry Dunn out of Portland, Maine, incredibly impressive and do a phenomenal job. And if we didn't have them, I don't know what our 2 IT people would be able to do, because Al our IT manager is involved with all the management, the product with the matrix people, so he really needs the support. Similarly, though, with our victim advocates, you might remember we have 4 budget lines: state's attorneys, sheriffs, victim advocates, and SIU. When the victim advocate program came over and was charged to the general fund, which was at the request of CCBS, they were being paid by federal money. CBS came to the legislature and said, could you pay them by general fund? This committee here gave the money to our department because they're our employees. But similarly, we just don't have an operating budget. So we need $38,000 to pay their IT bills. Because we've been paying for it out of the state's attorney's budget, and we think that we need to do better accounting and separate them a little bit. So the $38,000 is what we would be owing to ABS for their costs. Then we get to the sheriffs, the line on the sheriffs. So for years and years, an auditing firm out of Williston, McCauley McCoy, did the audits for the sheriff's departments. And you may know that statutorily, the sheriff's departments have to be audited every other year. And they have to, if a sheriff leaves office, there has to be an audit. And and every other year, they don't do a full audit. They do sort of just an quick overview. I'm looking at Sheriff Norris, Senator Norris, Sheriff Norris. So this year, it had to go out to bid, and Auditor Hoffer sent the RFP out for bid, and nobody bid on it except for CLA. Now, CLA is a really good auditing company. They do the state's audit. That's who would audit our department. They're very familiar with state government. They've never done the sheriff's. So they took a look at what they were gonna have to do for the sheriffs, and they said, we need more money. But we've budgeted $38,500 or whatever it was every year for years and years, and that's what paid the bill, because that's what it was, because Matsoli was really never increased their price to us. And but CLA is, so we are $41,300 in the hole, and that's presuming nobody else retires anytime soon, but, we know that we're at least that amount of money in the hole. We've talked to, Auditor Hoffer, and we've talked to the people at CLA, and we realize we don't have that money budgeted, but this all came on us very suddenly, like CLA is like new auditor. The sheriffs, I want to say, the sheriffs pay a portion of that audit bill. They pay a third, and we, the state of Vermont, pays the other 2/3.
I thought the assistant judges paid their third.
No, all the money, 2/3 of the bill is coming out from our department. It might have been like that at one point, Senator.
Yeah, it's been a while, and the other one was the compilations, that was the off-year compilations that we had done.
Right, that's what they call it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then why are the victim services not a part of the state's attorney's budgets, if don't they work in the state's attorney's office?
They do, and when CCBS asked the
And what is
state,
CC?
Vermont Center for Crime Victim
Oh, right.
Services and Welfare, when they asked for the state to pick up through the general fund, the victim advocates, the legislature created a separate budget line for them. But we pretty much underwrite, like the essays pay the phone bills, there's a lot of underwriting. But we've started to think about the fact that we need to have a more accurate budget for the victim advocates. It could have been, and perhaps should have been just put right in the SA budget, but it wasn't. And I don't know if there was some, I speculate on this, if there was some thought that said, if the money came to the SA budget and then there was ever a need for layoffs, that we would choose a victim advocate to lay off as opposed to an attorney. I never heard that said, but I had the same question, like, why are they creating a fourth budget line?
Right.
And that was what struck me, that somebody might think that the victim advocates would have been the chosen layoff situation.
Or if you chose to lay it off, you'd notice it easier, and you wouldn't have to dig into your budget to see that.
Yeah.
So remind me, they got money through a formula before, and that all went away.
So,
And then they created, Senator Sears is not here.
right, that's just so.
Yeah, and we paid attention, but not as much when Senator Sears was doing this.
So the program was funded forever, I want to say, until just a few years ago, through the U.S. Department of Justice Violence Against Women Act. You've probably heard that acronym, VAWA. So that was how it was funded for years and years and years. The federal money in the VAWA fund was going down, and there were, I think, lots of reasons for that. I think that some of the funding streams of that were penalties on white collar crime and things like that. But they were losing money, and so the decision that was made by CCBS was to say, I think this needs to be a general fund obligation. So we have 27 victim advocates. Every office has a victim advocate. Frankly, their caseloads are terrible. You'll hear that in our regular budget presentation. Really high caseloads, but they're a really critical part of the work that we do on behalf of victims. And they're doing a lot of assistance. It's not only just helping them understand what's happening in the criminal proceedings, but they're also helping them with comp and restitution. They're helping them with referring them to other services. So there's lots of things that they're doing. They're a pretty critical part of our operation.
And I don't see that in the list of items from the administration spreadsheet.
Yeah, then I think, so it was interesting because I think in my emails back and forth with finance and management, it was in there, and then I did see that it didn't make the chart list.
Right.
So we need to add, I think that needs to be added back in. I think so, but maybe Commissioner Gresham has a reason he didn't put it in, but it was initially because they literally picked everything else up and put it in, except for that. So, the other thing that we have is mental health evaluation costs. We budgeted that at $140,000. We've already paid out, this says 94,000 and change. I just signed something the other day for another $4,000. This goes up like daily. We get these expert requests. Part of this, I think, is probably not a surprise to you, but there's a tremendous number of requests for competency evaluations. There's more than ever before. I think that, you'll hear this. I think the situation of folks that are on the street who are getting involved in the system, a lot of them have mental health problems, and a lot of the judges are saying, is this person competent to stand trial or to face whatever's happening? So we have a ton of mental health competency evaluations, and we have blown through that budget. And
is that at the state's, that's through the state's attorneys you're
Yes.
talking about, yeah?
yeah,
And Senator, just because I know you've been involved in
Yeah,
helping
very
to
much.
clear the comp eval backlog that DMH was dealing with, we're talking about further down the intercept line. So they do the initial, and then when there's the next step, we need a subsequent, or we need them to come back for the hearing, the contested merits, then we are paying for them to come back as experts as to the competency that took place initially.
Well, it would be interesting to know what the revolving door looks like, and how many different opportunities.
and some of the challenge that we face is that DMH did a contract with a California company. And so, if we need that doctor, that psychiatrist say, to come to Vermont for the hearing, and in many cases, if it's gonna be any type of a serious hearing, issue, they're gonna have to come in, and most of the defense counsel and judges will not allow remote testimony in those in certain cases. So we then have the burden of not only the cost, but the cost of getting them here and all of their expenses while they're here. So that's really tough when you're dealing with a California company and we're trying to get them here. Because as you know, it's hard to get to Vermont from anywhere. Direct flights from anything, so that all, the costs are just going up and up and up. Plus we pay more than DMH does for the same company. They charge DMH $300, they charge us $450.
Yes, Senator Norris.
I thought in last year's bill that we pushed through that mobile Zooms were admissible at this point in time, that they, from California or whatever else.
Yeah, so during some hearings, some judges have taken the bill that you passed last year, and the miscellaneous bill, I believe, and said that for some hearings, they will allow for some remote testing.
Mm-hmm.
We still have to pay for their time during the remote testing, but for things like an actual trial, or I would say something like a weight of the evidence hearing where someone actually could be held and their liberty could be at stake, even temporarily, most judges are gonna say the confrontation clause is coming into play here, and we're not gonna risk getting a sort of Supreme Court appeal, and so they often are erring on the side of not having a Supreme Court appeal come back. And not all judges are reading the most recent statutes in terms of their ability to do that, and they're still erring on the side of caution, or they've read it and they're still erring on the side of caution. So,
I guess
but
that's
we
the
did
discussion
appreciate
to have
that
with
last
Judge
year.
Zoning.
Yes, we did appreciate what you passed last year, and Washington County actually has a case that I don't want to get into too much detail right now because it may be a Supreme Court appeal, but they have a case where this is coming up.
So are the licensed, the psychologists?
A couple years ago, you also made
We
changes so they could
made
be.
those changes too. Are those cheaper? Or are they cheaper?
Not necessarily,
Not necessarily.
sometimes, but not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily.
This whole area is a kind of a moving.
It's
I
a
know,
moving
Senator.
target, isn't it? Yeah, it's changing.
And then, similarly, we have a lot more people coming into the system who are not native English speakers. And so the courts are ordering translation of transcription, for hearings and things like that. So we budgeted what we had always budgeted about, and we budgeted 58.2, we've already spent 43.2. So, we looked at the budget and thought, where do we think we're gonna land? And we're keeping our fingers crossed, and we're asking for another $28,000 there. So all told, The request from the department is $445,800. And as you can see, a lot of that has come to us unexpectedly, which is, I know, the only reason you want to see us is if we didn't do a good job budgeting, but I think we try our best. And some of these costs just we were not anticipating.
Did you mention the increased cost of continuing legal ed for attorneys?
Oh, I'm sorry, I did not. Yes. So every year, we have 72 attorneys, and every year they have to do continuing legal ed to maintain their license. And we have an area that we had to, slice and dice on at different points over the years was training. And so we would like to ask for an additional increase for the training line of a $30,000 increase. So one of the things that we do with the training is we don't just do it for our attorneys. It's, yes, they have to have their required CLEs, continuing legal ed credits, but our victim advocates and our administrative support staff. This is a training where basically we try to bring everybody in. We have a number of sessions that we think they're all interested in. What happened at the legislature this year? What were the bills that were passed that affect us? And believe it or not, because, you might think, well, does everybody need to know that? Sure. Because a lot of times our admin staff is getting paperwork and, during a very busy arraignment day, and they may be looking at something and go, I think you got your charge code wrong, because I think that was updated by, I think the legislature made a change here. So they all really need to understand what happens here with, what happens with that. And in addition, we also always try to find people, there are some really great groups out there that will do training because they've got grants, like Equitas is a really great training organization. And I was on the phone with them yesterday. They will give us some free training, and we always look for that first, right? We always look for people who are willing to do things here and not have to, they can pay their own way, they can pay their own thing. They're doing a thing on how to present a case where you have a victim, ways to bring victim testimony into a hearing without basically compelling the victim to be present and grilled, so to speak. And I know that creates its own host of issues with the defense counsel and all of that, but there's some really interesting ways of compelling victim testimony, particularly people who are, raped, any of that stuff. It's very re-traumatizing for them to sit in a courtroom. So yesterday I was able to get them to commit to come to here in Vermont in June. And I also said, hey, how about if we bring the special investigation unit, all of the staff that work for them and all of the law enforcement that support them, get everybody in the room to listen to this. So we do look for this, but we are woefully underfunded for this because you can't find, you just can't find 2 days worth of 2 or 3 days worth of training, which is usually what we try to do, is to do it when the judges do their judicial college week. And literally we're like hat in hand begging for money at different places, and we don't want to be beholden to vendors. There's some of that you say, could you go to LexisNexis and ask them? We have to maintain sort of that really straight and narrow approach to the way we do business. I don't want to go to vendors and start asking them to support our training. I just think it doesn't look good.
Sure. Yeah, one other note on training. This coming up, there's a conference in Portland on case management, backlog, how are other states dealing with this? And Terry Corsone said, Tim, would you like to go to this? And I said, I would love to. We don't typically have a budget for something like this. So we're having Ian Sullivan go because he's been really our data person. But it is true that, across state government, there's an expectation that our attorneys who are handling 99% of the criminal cases, and there's 23,000 pending matters in our courts right now, with thousands of victims, 96 homicides pending, over 100 homicide investigations pending. There's a lot of heavy stuff going on, and our ability to train our staff to do that work is something I think Vermonters expect. And, we're learning, a lot of times, we're learning in the courtroom. We're learning drinking from the water hose, as I'm sure the sheriff knows. He's seen his fair share of hearings and been on the witness stand. Sometimes the best way we train people is going through the ringer, and sometimes that means making mistakes. So when there's the people that have that experience in the Vermont Bar, in the department that we can utilize, that's what we always try to do, and we've always been very thrifty with it. But there's an expectation that we're training our staff, and there's It's a particular type of law that we practice. It's not general, so.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Just one quick thing if I might. So the 30,000 additional requests, is that in the 445, or is it above and beyond the 445?
That's in the book.
It's in the 445.
Yeah, it is, thank you.
Are you gonna, I don't know if you're gonna have a sheet or a VAA request? I don't have that as of yet.
I think,
The only thing we have is this.
So we, sent over to.
Well, it's on the website.
Okay.
Yeah, we come-
There was a memo that under Tim, there's like 3 things, and under Annie, there's the memo that.
Always look for what's under Annie's name.
although not really, because I scanned something in and it only took the 1 page.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's
there's
helpful because you highlighted the dollar. You don't care about anything else, you can see the dollar.
Yeah, so there's a 2-page memo that explains everything with the total.
And it is on here,
Yeah,
This
it's on the
sheet.
big
Yes,
one.
yeah.
so the sheriffs have a line on here, but there's one thing that's different. Well, there's 2 things that are different. One is the dollar went down for the digital services, and then you didn't have the
The $38,000 for the victim advocates.
Victim advocates.
IT money, right, exactly. So I just
It
want
is?
to.
Oh, it is,
Yeah,
there is a line
It
there.
is a line item there. It's,
Oh, yeah, because the crime victim advocates have their own
38,000.
line, as we talked about having their own
yeah,
budget.
Give that to Tim, he can tell you what that is.
Okay.
So
didn't know what's in these
So the one good news, I think I'll say this, is, sometimes we've been in here and we've said, we're really having trouble recruiting, and we have, some vacancies, but the good news is, we are almost fully staffed. So the good news is, I think we only have like 1 deputy state's attorney, pending, a vacancy pending. I think we have 1 victim advocate, but we have 3 good applicants. So that's the good news, because we want, clearing this backlog means people for us to be able to get the work done. The bad news on that is that we always have a vacancy savings target we have to hit, and when you have positions filled, you struggle to get to your vacancy savings level. So that's kind of that's the good and the bad news. So the good news is they're filled, the bad news is they're filled.
Because you have vacancy savings in your FY 25 budget.
We do.
So we'll hear about that when you come in
Yeah.
for FY 26.
Thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
Be
thanks
careful,
for your
because
work.
Mount Real area was looking for attorneys, so.
Oh, I know. Well, it's hard,
You were there.
it's hard when we get poached.
Yeah.
And if you think about the fact that, they have 365 cases, they have to go out, they have on-call, we have mandatory coverage, and they're going out sometimes to pretty bad scenes, if there's a death situation, they may be going out. Tim experienced that as a prosecutor. And, and then you're in the grocery store trying to buy a quart of milk and somebody's yelling at you because you just, maybe prosecuted their kid earlier in the day or something. It's not and we have a lot of threats. But we do, so that's a stressful situation.
Sometimes those threats mean that we have to send a case out of the county where it's taking place, and another state's attorney deals with it. And that's not great for anybody.
Sure. Well, thank you. It's good.
Thank
work.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Senators.
It's good to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Good to see you too.
Say hi
Nice
to.
to see you. I
Yeah.
will think so.
Oh, good.
It's always good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for one. Yeah.
doesn't happen.
Is DOC out there in the hallway?
Take the opportunity to.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll take a 5-minute break.
Beautiful.
Oh,
You can have your break. Oh, yeah, what do you want to
yeah, well, let's just continue.
Yeah.
Although we lost half the table. That's okay.
Do we have a really high one?
Yeah. Good point.
Would everyone like hard copy?
I would.
Yeah, I'll take one too. And the BAA.
Thank you.
Is it little?
Yes, please, thank you.
If it's skinny, I'll take it.
It's small, yes.
All right, thanks.
We like to try to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
If it's online,
It is online.
I'll just do that. Norris probably wants one. Although he has his laptop out, there's iPad out there. If you have 3 of them, you can get one. Let's see.
We're still alive.
We're still alive now. Is Chris's? Oh, yeah, here it is. Yeah, you should.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Kristen Calver, Deputy Commissioner of Corrections, formerly Financial Director, so that's probably why I might look familiar to some folks. I have Linda Ladd with me, I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Good afternoon, I'm Linda Ladd, Financial Director for the Department of Corrections.
Welcome.
Thanks. Ours is very short. The packet I gave you starts in the B338 section, which is on page 6. Page 4, currently.
B338 is your section?
Yes.
It starts on
That first line there, the Justice Reentry OMS and EHR modifications demonstration, that is to support our 1115 waiver, which we recently were approved from the Center for Medicaid and Medical Services. And that, these are capacity building funds to make changes to our vendor management system and our electronic health record to support that work. The 1115 waiver will offer pre-release up to 90 days and post-release care management for folks in our system for services like medication, screenings, and then reentry care management, like I mentioned. Any questions about that?
Quick one if I might. Is this the waiver that takes care of after, for the reentry on, that we dealt with on the Justice Oversight Committee as far as Medicare, Medicaid doesn't cover them for the 30 days?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what
We did it.
That's right, you're there too. Good.
Okay, and the next two lines below that are our SLA additional costs from ADS. So included in our SLA, you might be familiar, are software licenses for our staff and different services that ADS provides for us. The reason we're needing extra funding is because the estimates we receive are done prior to the budget being submitted. So afterwards, the ADS does their calculation to true up what will be needed.
Okay, makes sense.
That's it.
That's it?
That's it.
Wow. In the central office, you mentioned that, or that's also part of the BDS change?
Yes, sorry, both of those lines are both from ADS. The top one is a AHS net neutral swap or change, and then the one below is additional funding.
Okay. Well, that's pretty straightforward. I'm sure when we talk about your next year's budget, we'll hear more about how things are going in the department.
Yeah, we could talk a lot more about that. It would be a much bigger packet, right?
Yeah. Any corrections about this? Questions about these adjustments and corrections?
No.
Corrections to corrections.
Corrections to corrections?
Quick and painless.
Well, thanks.
Sure.
Do you have anything else you
Well,
wanna
before
say?
you release me, I'd love to just run out now, but we do have a one-time funding request as well that we should probably cover.
Okay.
So I might, if you're okay, swap
Sure.
with Linda. This is for the Vermont Correctional Industry, so she'll give you a little bit of history and then how we got to this one-time need, which is to backfill a $3.1 million deficit in the fund. So I'll let her explain that, and then her and I can take questions.
Okay. Great. You can stay there if you want, but you can also change.
Backfilling the $3.1 billion.
Yes, Sandy, you have questions.
How much are we backfilling? This would be-
Just 3.1 million.
Oh, I thought you said billion.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I thought I heard that too.
Sorry, million.
Good afternoon. I'm not sure how much you know or do not yet know about the differences between DCI and BOWP. It's two pieces in the same fund.
You probably don't know the acronym.
Okay, DCI is Vermont Correctional Industries, and BOWP is Vermont Offender Work Programs. They were two distinctly different programs that were both under the same funding source. Vermont Correctional Industries, as you may recall, at one point had several, I'll call them manufacturing, opportunities for incarcerated individuals to earn some remuneration. And under that specific program, they were allowed to save some of their payroll, if you will, into a savings account that we held in trust. They could do 1% all the way up to 100%. And we would match when they left. If they were in good standing when they left, they would get whatever their savings was, and DCI would match that up to $4,000. And I can attest to the fact that there were some individuals who would leave with $6,000 of their own money in savings, and we would put in the extra $4,000, so they were walking out with $10,000. Very successful in that regard of helping people understand that savings will net you something when you get ready to leave. That said, we had several shops. We had a wood manufacturing location up in Newport, and that coexisted with a print shop and a sign and steel shop, and they all provided services to the state, nonprofits, other municipalities, school districts, and that sort of thing. They could not do anything that went directly to a private company. They could not sell anything. They could not do any work for them. That said, they also had a plate shop, which makes all of DMV's plates, and they had a small graphic art shop. The last couple of years, we transitioned based on our strategic plan within DOC. We strategically decided that that wasn't the way to go, because the base of customers was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because nobody was buying the hard desks anymore. They were all going to the modulars. So the desks and all of the other woodworking things that they were creating, there wasn't a market for it anymore. Certainly not within state government, and it was becoming less and less so between municipalities, school districts, and the like. So unfortunately, even though that was the one shop that employed the most incarcerated individuals, they were somewhere around the 60 range of incarcerated in that one location for that one manufacturing concept. In the print shop, they also were experiencing issues where they were doing a lot of specialized forms, but they weren't able to recoup what was required to actually get paid properly for the services they were providing. And then the same thing with the sign and steel shop. They provided a lot of information provided a lot of signs to AOT. They provided a lot to the municipalities. And that remained fairly strong, but again, being constrained by what you can sell your product for. Yeah. And what the actual costs were, there was a gap, which was starting to add into the deficit, if you will. It was starting to create that deficit, and it just was getting bigger and bigger. So strategically, the department decided that's probably not the best way to go. We could introduce vocational training in another way. So they decided to decommission from those particular shops. The plate remains, and the graphic arts shop remain. The others have all been.
Was that also the cruise, the work cruise that would go out?
Work cruise is VOWP.
Okay.
The Vermont Offender Work Program. They were within the same fund, but different ideas.
Because that has ended too.
That is correct. So I can speak to the work.
Discussion again.
I can speak to the work cruise. The work cruise involved people who had completed their sentence, but the courts had directed them to provide restitution to the community. So they had an obligation to do some kind of community service as part of their being out on supervision. So these were supervised individuals. And those individuals worked on contracts that the probation and parole offices secured with municipalities for cemeteries and this sort of thing. As the individuals who were coming into that program, either there was a lack of individuals that were being sentenced that way, which if that's a reality, or they were not able to perform. They might have been ill or unable to do the work that was required, because they were doing mowing, they were painting, they were doing those sorts of things. So it was kind of a good time to discontinue those things, so that it would discontinue the drain on what was happening with the fund itself. COVID certainly didn't help anybody because we had many months where we could not do any work. And what work they were doing, they were making PPE for the other incarcerateds, because being able to get the supplies was very difficult. I'm sure you all recall how rough that was. And so there was no revenue to come in to offset. People were, so there were many months where that went on. And that it just exacerbated the problem. And that was sort of the beginning of basically the end of the way we know it or knew it for a program. And so with strategic planning, we were able to change that, transition to a vocational training model in place and keep just the two that we have now, and the other ones were all discontinued. And so now we have the vocational training model. And so we had that period of transition where, again, you're not having revenue, but you're closing shops down, you're decommissioning, and that just kept exacerbating that problem of a negative number.
And is this a new thing, or is it somewhere in the administration's BAA?
As far as, I'm sorry.
The vocational program? Oh, the 3.1?
Yeah.
It's part of the one-time request. I believe, is it in the AHS, Tracy, documents? It's just, okay, it's in language.
Okay, so I would find it in the language.
Yes.
Okay, any questions about that? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're gonna talk about liquor and lottery until 6:30.
Trying to email her to get her up.
She's gonna come, she's doing remote. So we'll break till 3 and hopefully at 3, liquor and lottery.
Okay.
Okay.